désir qui naît, la paix qui naît, tes lèvres, tes yeux, tes fleurs sur mon visage. Here's the English translation. I dream that I dream, your feeble hands on my face, my bitter tears between your fingers. Do you remember the tepid rain and the hair of the shivering trees? The night came, it was in ash, sweeter than the sorrows of the day. My forehead freezes in the basket. With your welcoming arms, my cheek, my lips, near are the secret and precious fruits. The lamp obscured, our shadows shrouded. Present is desire, the peace that is born. Your lips, your eyes, flowers on my face. Then I'm going to share with you a poem that I wrote about, let's see, almost 2 years ago. Well, it hasn't been 2 years, last year during the COVID. I was thinking about what was going on in our culture, the rise of the Black Lives Movement in the country, and people who have been, who've gone, who've disappeared. I was thinking about, what the country was going through during that time. So I wrote this poem. It's called I Sent a Letter to the Moon. Last night, I wrote a message to the moon with my black ink. I sent a text to the four corners of the land. It has no end. I spoke about a world with no sun, a community absence of the stars, a city full of rough winters and summers, no spring to light the pace. The flowers die of a savage season. Children in homes sleep in tears. Last night, I wrote a message to the moon with my black ink. I offered up my words, about 10,000 fragments of despair, notes that fill up the galaxies in blood, complaints that make the rainbow in the clouds hide. I sent lilies in the heavenly high to be heard, to reach life above. I bent my heart to receive hope as the highest form of sacrifice. Blinded by the beauty of the moon, the angels of death gave access to the gates of light. The angel of deception sat on the top of the heavenly ladder. They led me to the Queen of Heaven, where freedom in black does not die. Thank you.
All right, so that was really powerful. Now, I had no intention of sharing my own short story, but since we are a small group of people and since we have a little bit of time, I'm going to read a short story that I wrote, again, many, many moons back. And it really doesn't fit with the theme, probably, but this is a story about a young woman who's married and who is trying to find her voice as a writer. And I have seen with so many women that they don't receive a lot of support from their family or from the community because writing, for whatever reason, is not viewed as a productive labor because it doesn't bring in money. Again, this was written probably 10 years back, so it's amateur, and I was a lot younger and inexperienced and a lot angry then. So the short story is called The Song of the Caged Bird. They tell her she's a dutiful wife. They assure her husband that he's a lucky man to get such a doting partner. Her husband smiles approvingly, relishing every word of the compliment. Her friends envy her. Wife of a successful industrialist, proud mother of two, owning an apartment in the heart of Calcutta. Her life seems to be a continuing dream from the pages of a fairy tale culminating in happily ever after. But it's not true to her. She knows how happy she is. Only she knows the life in the story. Every afternoon, she sits drowsily on the veranda, lazily watching the parrot in the cage. The bird has lost its spirit. It doesn't protest against its captivity by vigorously flapping its wings on the steel rails of the cage. It doesn't screech hungrily for food anymore. She tries hard to remember the last time she heard it singing. The bird has become a relic of its past, waiting perhaps to rest its worn-out body in eternal sleep. She grows restless of her boredom. The dullness of the afternoon prolongs for hours. A thought crosses her mind. Yesterday, she met an old friend on her way to the market, and he invited her to attend a literary gathering of budding young writers. He urged her to write something and present before the group, knowing that she was a powerful writer of the college literary magazine. She laughs at the impossibility of the suggestion. It has been almost ages that she wrote anything serious apart from grocery list. Her creativity has never been nurtured by her husband, who likes to buy and display expensive books but never cares to browse them. But today, this lonely hour plays a trick on her mind. Her boredom becomes her muse, inspiring her to create something of her own. She tries to grapple with a plot that faintly glimpses her mind. She plays with the free-flowing words, trying to give order to the chaos of invention. Slowly she emerges completely into the game of creation, oblivious to the passing time. "What are you doing in the dark, Arati?" She almost jolts at the voice of her husband. Quickly she glances at the clock hanging in front of her. It's 9 o'clock, and she hasn't even set the table for dinner. She could sense disapproval and agitation in her husband's tone. She knows he hates to break his time schedule even at home, the first thing she had learned to adjust right after her marriage. Ashamed and guilty, she mutters, "I'm so sorry, dear. I was about to finish a story that I planned." "What?" said a disbelieving voice. "You're writing stories the entire evening when I'm starving for food? Have you gone out of your mind? What is wrong with you?" The voice rose to a peak, signaling anger and agitation of her husband. The same tone has always grounded her with fear and hate. She had always found herself cowering down before the yoke of his restless tenor. But today everything was different. Today she was bewitched by a mysterious spirit which was persuading her, coaxing her, forcing her to confront him. She was driven by an irrepressible urge to finish her story. She gathered all her courage and, for the first time, voiced her opinion in front of Ashim. "I'm really sorry, dear, but you see, I must complete this story tonight so that I can read it in the writers' conference. Please, dear, just for today, can you warm up the food in the cooler and help yourself with dinner as I work with my writing?" Aghast, Ashim stares at his wife. Is she going crazy? They had been married for 12 years and never had he heard his wife speaking back to him. He has been the master of the house, and he liked to maintain it that way. He could feel the anger bubbling in his blood, instigating the dormant beast within him. With an uncontrollable rage, he snatches the paper, rips them violently, and throws the pieces across the room. The white sheets drop off like snowflakes on a nippy winter night. Silence passes between the two. Arati pulls herself up, collects the torn pieces, and walks to the kitchen without looking at her husband. He sits on the floor, panting with exhaustion but satisfied with the accomplishment. He has once more taught a lesson to his foolish wife to be within her threshold, not daring to transgress, like the moth desiring for the star. In the dark corner of the house, the cage bird has stopped singing. Once upon a time, it knew a song of happy past, but remembers it no more. Thank you. So that concludes our panel. If you have questions, comments, feedback, since we are such a small, intimate group, if you don't mind, switching on your microphone, your camera, and asking us directly, or you can put it in the chat, anything that you want to ask the group.
I was curious about how widely distributed is your journal expressions? Is it distributed out in the community, or is it just available on campus? I was wondering what a reach within the community might be.
Right, so we have used Amazon's Create Space to publish our journal. And so Dr. Joseph ordered maybe like 25
25.
copies. Yeah. So right now we are just distributing it to the writers, our friends and family. We will also do a fundraising event, but for people outside our college, you can go to Amazon, and then if you type in expression musing of the river, you should be able to see our journal and buy it.
So we still have to do the marketing job.
Dr. Joseph knows more about the journal. You want to elaborate?
Well, so what I just said, we still have to do the marketing job to make people in the community know about the journal. Even at the college, okay, not everybody knows about our second volume. So, but we did promise ourselves to improve, to make some improvements. So people in the community, people at the college, or people at different colleges across the nation will be able to enjoy the amazing work of our students.
Yeah, we were actually planning to bring, a bunch of journal to the FCEA conference. Unfortunately, now we are online. But yeah, just word of mouth, just talking to people. Right now, we don't have a lot of resources for promotion, but it's mostly word of mouth and friends and family and students within the college. And of course, if anybody else from the conference wants to buy it, that would be lovely.
Yeah, that's part of the drawback of being virtual is that all of our books and journals and things we don't otherwise have tangible access to.
Right.
I also had a question for Dr. Joseph. I was listening and wondering, what was the translating process like with the poem from French to English? I imagine that alone must have been, an act of creative interrogation or interpretation, just, choosing what you thought to be the words that were representing, the original language. So I was kind of fascinated by that, hearing.
Well, here's what happens. The translation work was not difficult for me because I've been working on, in both languages, English and French for many years. So I mostly, in my writing, I deal with Francophone writers in the Caribbean and Africa. So, but the work, the poems of Jacques Romain could be a little difficult because he was a very complex writer. For example, he would use his poetry to express his political messages and and ideological worldviews on certain things going on in Haiti and France. So now this I translated two of his poems for this volume, but in my previous work, a big book I wrote about him, I've done some translation. So for these two poems, I think I spent about like 2 days. And of course, thank God for Google Translation. That was very helpful. Also, I went back to some of his poems that he wrote in the same year to try to understand the process of his thought, even the rhetoric, right? The rhetoric that he shares, actually, he articulates in other poems. Okay? So I hope I have answered the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny. I tell my students I try to avoid teaching poetry. I mean, this is kind of a bizarre confession. Just poems that have been translated. It's like in poetry, so much depends on the cadence of the words and individual meanings and word choices. So that's why I was curious about like how you made those sorts of choices, just the act of translation. Yes, you absolutely did. It's just I wondered how much. I guess I should probably ask you like how much, even though it's your own translation, how much you felt you might have lost or retained relatively of the original work.
Well, yeah. Let me elaborate on that.
Like critique your own work.
Yeah. Let me elaborate on that. Translation, in essence, to translate a piece from one language to another always involves the work of interpretation. Somewhat we have to interpret, and sometimes, for example, the French language and English language are not the same. Some of the expressions in French do not translate directly into the English language. So the translator has to make a choice. Again, in my own writing, my central goal is to, when I translate a particular work, right, or a poem or a short story, my ultimate goal is to be faithful to the original ideas and or thought of the writer. I know this is very difficult when involves translation. Even for example, even in in the English translations of the Bible, we have over 122 translations of the Bible in the English language, if it's not more. So each translation, right, has a philosophy. So some of those translations are translated from the Greek and Hebrew word for word or word by word, and some focus on on the intent of the author. So with Jacques Romain, since I'm familiar with these ideas, so I try to not only to translate faithfully from one language to another, because I pay attention to his diction, to his rhetoric, the syntax, right? But also, I have to make a choice to translate the word to enable the English speaker to relate, to be able to read that in their own language, to make sense to the English audience.
Yeah, if I can add to what Dr. Joseph said, and I am with you, Christopher. I do sometimes teach translated works, but I'm always hesitant, especially if I'm teaching something that is translated from Bengali, which is my native tongue, to English. So for example, when I read the translations of Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel laureate from India, since I have read his original work in the original Bengali language, which is amazing, right? And then the translations, even when he did his own translations, something was lost in translation, you know, and so this problem of whether we should call it translation,
Or interpretation. Or
exactly,
transliteration too.
transliteration or transcreation, you know, so we have these words of transcreation, which means that when it is translated, it becomes like a whole, it has its own new dimensions, you know. So, and also, I think the problem of translation involves when you don't have direct words, right? When you don't have words in the English vocabulary to encapsulate that idea, right? So for example, in Sanskrit, there's a word called rasas. It is loosely translated as emotions, but it is not really emotions, right? Also, when you read Tagore, you know, some of his poems are about submission, and he uses the word God. But this God is not the God that we understand, and I know it because I know, you know, Tagore, I know the context, I know the Bengal Renaissance that happened in the 19th century, and I know his belief. I know his religious belief, which doesn't really, I mean, you know, he belonged to this, you know, movement called Brahmo Samaj, which was inspired by the Protestant movement in England and so on. So the idea of a monolithic God does not resonate with him. But when students here read it, they interpret it, you know, through their own cultural lens. So I think there's always a problem, but you know, I do think that if you know the writer, if you are familiar with the culture, with you know, the larger context, I mean, that sometimes help, especially when you're teaching, you can give those contexts to the students and help them understand better.
Now, Chris, I'm going to share something with you. A stanza from Je rêve je rêve, I dream that I dream. That was very difficult for me to translate. But since I know the way Jacques Romain thought and the people who have influenced him, for example, Jean-Paul Sartre, the great French existential philosopher. So, before he ends the poem, this is what he wrote. Désir qui naît. There simply means desire. But literally it means the desire that is, right? So he was speaking about his longing to go back home, to be with his family, his existential predicament. Then I said, I have to try to make sense to what he's trying to say here. That's one. And I wanted to maintain the poetic value. So I said, okay, let me play with this. So I translated this, present is desire, which communicates both, right? His existential philosophy, right? His predicament, you know, his longing to go home. Then he says, he wrote, la paix qui naît. La paix means peace. Naît, that's the verb, to be born. Okay, I said, this is not too hard, but literally saying, okay, the peace that is, okay? So I was thinking, how should I translate this in English? Again, I wanted to maintain the poetic intent here. Okay, the beauty that is embedded in the French language. So I said, okay, let me try with this. The peace that is born. So, I thought I would just share this little example with you.
That's
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes.
I'm always fascinated by transliteration and adaptation and translations and stuff. So,
Yeah.
thank you for such copious examples.
You're very welcome. Other questions?
I actually thought this might be a good time to ask the students, because the students might be one of their first conferences, if they had questions about what to expect from a conference, or just anything else they might want to know.
And these are unusual circumstances too. That
Right.
this conference is being held. Usually a lot more convivial in person.
Right, yeah. Anybody wants to
You
come up
guys,
and ask?
any
Or
questions?
all
there?
four of you can come here and ask.
Yeah.
Billy, you want to come up?
Sure.
I can. Yes, go ahead.
Look what you did, Kirsten, you made them all.
So now that we like share our poems, like now like what do we do? Like do we like network with each other or something, or you guys give us advice? I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, again, in person, this would be so much easier because, you'd be milling around after the session, talking to people, there'd be always the beverage tables out in the hallway. So, yeah, that's what usually happens. I mean, you do end up networking with people, you get to talk, as I was alluding to before, if you had copies of your journal, you get to see that. There's usually a textbook publisher that comes and you can get free books from them. So, to answer your question in a simplistic way, yes, that's what normally happens at conferences. And it's still not, impossible. Like you said, we got information about where to access the journal to potentially. So that's. Oh, yeah, sorry.
And you guys are free to come join some of the other sessions as well. We've got plenty today. I don't know if you guys have seen the schedule yet. You've got your hard part out of the way. So by all means, drop in, see what work some of the other instructors are doing, and if any of it interests you, feel free to ask us questions.
Is your other conference just other students like singing the poems?
Faculty members mostly. But then there's the keynote speaker. Yeah, Kristen.
At 5?
At 5 or
5:30.
I will be introducing.
Oh, okay.
I know that's not really a selling point.
No, that's wonderful. Christopher, do you want to talk a little bit about her, the keynote speaker, to our students?
Yeah, sure. The one today, Kristen Arnett, she is a great writer. She's a great short story writer, I think. Her novel, Mostly Dead Things, is, I think a lot of people are familiar with that. She just published a novel, I think 2 months ago or so, with T, that I have not read yet, but Felt in the Jaw, her story collection. I was planning to talk about this in my intro, because I feel like it's one of her more obscure works, but she's a Florida writer. I think she lives in the Miami area now. Let me go to the program. I'm going to freely just paraphrase things from here. She's a queer fiction and essay writer. She's won, it has a list of a lot of the awards that she's won, and her Twitter feed, and she was, Mostly Dead Things was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in Fiction, which I did not know, and I believe, I don't want to, I emailed her to ask about this and haven't heard about it, but I believe that this is being developed as a series. I don't know how far in development it is. Mostly Dead Things, her novel. So, yeah, it's pretty good. There's a lot of Flannery O'Connor qualities to her short stories, I would say. And even this novel, Mostly Dead Things, is about taxidermy and, very sort of easily gothicized subject matter, I believe, too. So it's definitely engaging for writing.
That actually intrigues me because Flannery O'Connor is honestly one of my favorite authors. I'm a really, really big Southern Gothic fan, so I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, this book, minus the queerness and religious moralizing of that, or wait a minute, no, I got that back. Yeah, Flannery O'Connor would be without the queer characters and with more religious moralizing. But other than that, there's weird bodily growths and like ominous spider bites and birds dive bombing your house. And it's just sort of like the real kind of grotesque and bizarre things you can see in stories like Flannery O'Connor's.
Yeah, that's a perfect fit for Halloween, right?
Yep.
Yeah, well.
I did have
Yeah,
one
you have a
question
pretty
though.
cool opportunity. Go ahead.
How long has the FCEA been around for?
Oh, I don't know that one.
I know, yeah, where's our archives?
I don't know that I can give you an exact time, but I've been with it for more than a decade now, and it's going on well for me, so I'm gonna say
Wow, so you've probably seen a lot of just, great, like, just young authors, like, or young aspiring writers such as ourselves come and go. Wow, that's a long time.
So as part of the FCEA, we also have a creative journal that you all might be interested in submitting to. Yeah, the Orange Blossom Review. It's very competitive. It's peer reviewed. I'll find the link and put it here in the chat, but that might be something that you want to pursue. And a plug for next year's conference. We also regularly hold open mic nights after our keynote speakers.
Yeah, that's the other thing too.
Yeah, so whether or not you graduated, please consider submitting for next year's FCEA. We are completely planning on being back in Orlando, and we'd love to see you there.
I think we can all say with complete confidence we'll go.
Contest orders.
Yes.
And I don't know if any of you guys want to be teachers in the future, but you've got a pretty cool opportunity here, since a lot of the people presenting are instructors. Some of the conference presentations might be things that you have wondered before about what teachers do. Some of it is kind of what teachers don't ever really get to teach what we want to. We've done a couple panels on things like Star Wars and Batman, just because nobody usually lets us write courses about Star Wars and Batman, so this is where we get to do that stuff. We get to use our teacher brain to do cool stuff. But we've also got a couple of panels on different things that might kind of let you peek behind the curtain of what teaching is like, if that is something that you're interested in the future, or what publications like, and working in those kinds of positions. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of stuff that I think might be interesting for someone. I know that I was not ever planning on becoming a teacher, so I didn't have a lot of time to really think about and watch what people do ahead of time. So if that is something that interests you, this is one of those ways that can definitely help.
Thank you. Very informative.
I was gonna say, I didn't get a chance to answer, I know we're almost out of time, but with the open mic night, that would have been great. You guys all have great, cadence in your reading. I was gonna ask what kind of opportunities on campus or in the community were there to read your work. I know it's COVID now, so I don't know if people get poetry readings and things like that. But,
Yeah,
I didn't
we
know if that was something that you guys have done in the community on campus.
Yeah, we have. So we do try to do some, open mics. In the past, we have presented at, other cultural events like, Black History Month, poetry reading, Hispanic History Month, and then the other, cultural events that happen at our college. This year, we were planning. I mean, we are still planning. It's in the books. It's going to happen, sometimes next year. So we are planning to collaborate with our county libraries, and then they have something like every year. Our main St. Lucie County Library, they have a forum for young authors, like the first-time authors, almost like a conference kind of a thing, where there is book signing and things like that. So we are trying to collaborate with them and have these guys